Welcome to a very special episode of Managing the Problems of Daily Living. We're delighted and truly privileged today to have author and social worker Kristin Mekov on the program today to talk about her wonderful book, A Widow's Guide to Healing, and also to elucidate for us important areas of concern like gaslighting, which we'll get to, and other issues that we may be working on. So we really appreciate your help with all of this, Kristin. Good to meet you.
Good to meet you too, Linda. Thank you so much for taking time to speak with me. I appreciate it.
Sure. In the intro, I mentioned that you're a social worker and an author, right? So
yes, I obtained my MSW from the University of Michigan, and then I wrote this book, A Widow's Guide to Healing, several years later after, unfortunately, I lost my husband to cancer.
You have a very interesting history. Obviously, we're all so sorry for your loss. I think you turned your loss into an opportunity to help and heal others as well as yourself, right?
Well, that was my intent. After I lost my husband, I was 33 in 2007, and I read everything I could about grief and loss. It could be that of a spouse or partner, that of a child, a sibling, a coworker, a sister. I was just curious how people heal. So I read everything from articles in People magazine to academic journals to learning about broken heart syndrome, because I really was curious about how people became resilient and thrived after loss. And I noticed that there was a paucity really in the research at the time. And I noticed that there weren't a lot of narratives about women. And again, this is in 2007, late 2008, 2009, 2010. And that's when I decided I was going to go around the world, literally, and interview as many women as I could, because I believe that there's power in sharing the narrative and in learning from other people's stories. And so that's what I did for a number of years.
I think it's very brave and it's very affirming to have someone disclose, which you do in the book. And obviously that was the impetus for this book in the first place. But I agree with you, when you see other people walking that same journey, it can be helpful.
Certainly. I mean, I was sharing just with somebody the other day that I interviewed over 100 women for the book, and I'm still talking with women. I love to hear stories about resilience, about the power of the narrative, and also different tips for coping with loss, not just because we had a shutdown, but for my own growth and learning to, again, help to amplify the voices of women.
Your book, the subtitle is Gentle Support and Advice for the First 5 Years. What did you find to be the most important advice that you received and that you give to others? And I think it's going to be more than one thing, I'm sure.
Yes, thank you for asking that question. It is more than one thing. One of the things I learned, and I didn't really quite understand it all at the time, but was the importance of sharing your story. And whether that's with a support group for people who may have experienced something that's similar to your own, or whether it's online, and again, to be careful in doing so, or in a journal or with a trusted mental health professional, sharing your story is a very powerful experience. And it can also, I believe, aid in healing. And the second thing that I learned, And the second thing that I learned is that it's really important, I think, to be able to seek the mental health professional that is able to best match you wherever you are in your journey, to be able to go through that process with them of being able to heal, because you're not alone. And it's important to understand that grief is not a DIY. It's not a do-it-yourself process or project. And it's okay at various times, wherever you are, post-loss, to seek out that type of trusted mental health professional.
You say so much in this book that when we were speaking earlier, I shared with you can be so helpful to so many people who are dealing with loss in general, right? Choosing certainly a therapist, but a support team. Maybe it's not the people in your family. Maybe you have to seek out friends. Maybe it's not all your friends, right? Maybe it's only a couple people that can really listen and not be afraid to approach you. I think you talk a lot about that in the book.
So I actually found in my own experience that, and this is partly too because I'm an introvert, that my closest friends weren't people who experienced loss in the same way that I had. And so
Right.
I guess that kind of surprised me. My very good friend who helped me through the initial weeks following my husband's death, who was someone who wasn't, a widow, but she experienced a loss of a different type. She went through a very painful divorce. And my other really good friend who helped me through this time was someone who lost a child at a very young age to leukemia. So sometimes the best people to guide you through difficult times are not always the people who experience the exact same situation that you have.
But I think your point of I agree with you. People that can hear you and feel your pain don't necessarily have to have walked the same walk. But I think it's important to keep looking. And that's one aspect, to talk to people. You also talk about the importance of exercise when you were in between your self-medications, as you say in the book. You found that you didn't need them anymore because you were moving, you were socializing, you were connecting with people.
Right. So, I get this question asked a lot. Should I see a psychiatrist? Should I see a physician? And I always say yes, because everybody's a little different. For example, I wear glasses and they help me see better. And sometimes people find relief in taking particular medications. For myself personally, it was very overwhelming. I found that it made me very tired, and being tired wasn't exactly helpful for me. So it didn't provide really a clear aspect and didn't relieve any of the symptoms of grief and loss. So what I did is I found a class for myself that I started going to. It was a local to my community at the time for yoga. And I also started running again. And that's when I decided I was going to, train myself, even though it wasn't like a professional trainer, just put myself on my own training plan.
Well, I think you talk about spirituality and all kinds of elements that factor into recovery and healing. And I like the idea that you talk about Elizabeth Kubler-Ross stages of death and dying, and, anger, acceptance, bargaining, and that not everyone follows the same course, that grief is fluid, that there may be, you quote Joan Didion, the book of Magical Thinking, that, you may be in the grocery store and something triggers you. And that's what people have to understand. When people say, well, you're probably getting over this now, or you're getting better, how do you respond to that?
Well, I don't think you get over loss. And I think that that's really a misconception, that there's a particular point. Oh, it's a year, it's 2 years, it's 3 years, it's after this holiday, you're going to just all of a sudden feel better. In fact, I think that can set people up for not feeling better and feeling that there's something wrong with the way they're grieving, because they've reached what others consider to be a milestone in time and they don't feel better. So what I say to that is that it's important to learn how to carry your loss. And for myself, what I've found to be most helpful is that I've learned to carry the life of the person with me. So when I carry the life of my now late husband, or the life of my mother or father, that's so much lighter than carrying their death. And it doesn't mean that I don't miss them, or that particular song, as you said, can spark a memory or trigger a tear. That's not what that's about. But carrying the life is, for me, much lighter and allows me really to be able to cope in a different way.
Kristin, I think we were speaking about the fluidity of grief and loss, and it's not kind of concretized. What do you think about people asking you, how do you feel now? And what about your loss? Or they have a story. Your husband's name was Roy. How do you receive that?
Well, I'm always grateful when people do ask, because I think it's actually the opposite. So what I noticed when speaking with all of these women, and still do listen to their stories, many times people feel that their loved one and the loss has been forgotten because nobody's asking and nobody shares their name. Nobody asks them how they're doing. And I think the only reason, and this is, just my own opinion, is that people are asking about my story and my journey with grief is because of the book, or they see something I'm in the media from time to time with some very well-known people, and they'll just think, oh, so what are you up to? That's more common than actually asking how I'm coping. Sometimes it comes up at the holidays, but many times it doesn't, and it can be hurtful, I know, for people who are mourning their loved one when no one asks.
That's, I think, what I was trying to elicit. So I've actually learned that in my life. People will say, well, I don't want to ask about them because I don't want to make them sad, but you're always sad, right? You may be able to put it in a box, but I think to pretend like the person didn't exist and your husband was very important to you and it was a huge loss. And maybe there's a memory that they shared with him that would be helpful for you to hear. So I think that's another kind of thing that's important for people to know. They're thinking about your husband and it's okay.
Well, I think too, it's now, 4 decades, for example, without my father, and you can't replace people. You can replace roles. You can, for example, you can get a substitute teacher for a classroom or whatever, but you can't replace the person. And I think that's really important, especially for parents, for example, who are helping their children grieve a parent or a spouse or a partner, that their child, although they may not verbalize that they're missing their parent or grandparent or friend or sibling, they are always thinking about it. And many times children won't say it. It's not that they're trying to lie. It's just because they may not want to hurt somebody. They don't want to bring up a conversation. But I think that's an important point, that it's always on their mind. It may not be in the forefront. There's not a day that goes by that I don't think of my loved one.
Let's talk about children for a second, because you speak in your book. You really have a blueprint for what to do, not only how to grieve and how to communicate with friends, but walking through the financial stuff, but also if you're a parent of children, whether they're young or old, how to manage their grief.
Right. So I started, unfortunately, doing this journey in 1979 when grief and loss weren't spoken about with other people. And my father, as I said, died when I was about 2 weeks shy of turning 5. So my mother was the first widow that I knew. And what I know about grief and loss is that it's a very isolating experience. So even though we're now obviously decades out from that point in 79, the theme for children, that when I listen to them, is how lonely it still is for them. And it can be lonely even within the same family, because each person within the same family, while they may both be missing, for example, their mother or their sibling, experience that differently. And then again, it's dependent on the relationship to that person. Different people have different ways of expressing it. But I think it's important for parents to realize that their children are experiencing it differently at different points in their life.
And to give them permission to talk about it or to ask questions.
Right. So what's different is that many times, especially if it's an early loss, meaning early in their childhood, is that the person is getting to know their loved one through somebody else. For example, I got to know my father through my mother, through my paternal grandparents, my paternal uncle, which is a much different experience than getting to know the person one-to-one.
You spoke about that in your book, and it was very poignant that you got to know your father through your grandmother, and that when she died, her death was so impactful for you.
It was a very special relationship, because she was really the keeper of these memories, of these photos, of these experiences, insights that she had into my father. And it wasn't always happy things. She didn't sugarcoat things. My grandmother was very much to the point, very honest, at times brutally honest. And I think that really helped me to understand who my father was better, because it's obviously it was age appropriate. She wasn't telling me these things early on, but there's I don't know, I guess you'd say a bias to wanting to share only, pleasant things. And it doesn't always help the child. Again, it's age appropriate. to know, just one side of that person.
You also mentioned, the children can journal in their own way. They can go to a group. You mentioned Ely's Place. I've had lots of people over the years that tell me that those kinds of experiences are very helpful. We will return with Kristin Mekov to continue this very important conversation after the break.
If you love them enough to relearn math so you can teach them math, then surely you'll check nhtsa.gov/the-right-seat to make sure they're correctly buckled in the back seat.
Welcome back to a very important episode of Managing the Problems of Daily Living. We are honored and privileged today to have author and social worker Kristin Mekov here to discuss her wonderful book. What an excellent resource for us, A Widow's Guide to Healing, Gentle Support, and Advice for the First 5 Years. I think the most important takeaway that I got from reading this book was the concept of what I call reframing or cognitive behavior therapy. In your book, you describe Byron Katie's theories of turnaround, right? So I'm going to take this not negative experience and make it a positive one, but I'm going to try to find the benefit,
Well, I think Byron Katie work, and I haven't met her, but it's what helped me get through this anxiety initially is that many times there's lots of anxiety, not necessarily about the loss itself, but things that generate after the loss. So when I had anxiety about things, what I would do is I would integrate her theories and practices and ask myself, the first thing she asked is, do you know this to be true? So if somebody, for example, is not calling you back, do you know it to be true that they're purposely ignoring you? And if the answer is yes, you obviously go down one path, but if the answer is no, it kind of stops you right then and there, because otherwise you're making assumptions and your emotions are getting stirred up based on what could be an incorrect assumption. So I found her work to be very helpful.
So if you blast through that and you say, okay, gather the evidence, that's not maybe what's happening, what can you say to yourself or do instead? So instead of maybe being sad or anxious, to your point, waiting for this person to connect with you, what can you do differently to quiet that anxiety?
For myself, what I found to be very helpful, again, things have changed over the years, but it usually stops right at that point because I don't know it to be true. That somebody's actually purposely, for example, not, responding to a text and not responding to an email. And then the second thing, that I think is really helpful for myself is I've created lots of different ways to distract myself. If, something is that anxiety provoking, I know that one of the things that I do is I'm very much into reading. So I read, like a lot of nonfiction as well as fiction. I go for a lot of walks. I have a very small, close circle of friends that I can always chat with. And so that's really helped me as long as, I'm keeping those things in check. And my daily meditation practice is also essential to my well-being.
Well, you're connected with some pretty big heavyweights in the meditation business. Kristin is a close associate of Deepak Chopra, Oprah. You've consulted with Katie Couric and Maria Shriver. So all people that know the benefits of all the things that we're talking about, spirituality and connecting and meditation. We were speaking earlier about grit and resilience, and how do you see this experience? And that in your book, you talk about post-traumatic growth. How do you see all of your life experiences impacting on that element? And what can you suggest for the rest of us in terms of increasing our own resilience?
Well, I think very early on, while it wasn't a conscious decision, I'm saying very early on because I was under age 10 when, some of this trauma happened, is that I stayed stubborn. And staying stubborn in a positive way allows you to really see things through a different lens and turn things around. And I think that one of the most important things that one can do is knowing that there is a different way to see everything. And when you choose to see things differently and in a different way, sometimes it's waiting, sometimes the answer's not always going to be right there for you. on how you can view this situation differently. It allows you to experience, long-term, they're calling it post-traumatic growth now. Some people call it resilience. Some people call it grit, whatever you call it. It really has helped and shaped and informed me and opened me to new possibilities and opportunities and ways of connection as well.
So it's talking back, it's continuing to gather the evidence, it's maybe setting aside the initial anxiety if this person's not calling me to pick up the phone. That's so hard. And one of the examples you talked about in the book, just about being overwhelmed in the beginning, was that you came inside, you took a nap, you didn't even realize that you hadn't taken the key out of the front door, that the door was wide open, that the ice cream was melting on the countertop. Different points in time, people have greater energies, right, than other times. If you're at the point of your greatest trauma, in the moment of trauma and vulnerability, how were you able to walk through that with the strength and grace that you've lived your life with?
Well, I don't think it was always graceful. Let's put it that way. It wasn't always something that was something
Pretty.
that, was pleasant and beautiful.
Mm-hmm.
So just to be clear, the initial stages after, or if one is going through a traumatic experience in this point in time, it was not one of deep reflection and thinking, oh, this is my purpose. I'm going to be able to turn this around into, X, Y, and Z. So I tell people that it is always okay to simply live in the needs of the day, whatever those needs are. So living in the needs of the day is different for different people. So if that means that you're reaching out to your doctor, or you're scheduling an appointment for a follow-up scan, or you're logging into your portal, and they have patient portals now, whatever it is, simply living in the needs of the day when you're going through a traumatic experience is enough.
And don't ask of yourself anything more in those moments. Right.
No, because it takes literally all of your energy and your ability to live in the needs of the day. I don't think that people, unless they've been through something that's traumatic, really understand what it's like to know that your next 5 days depend on getting the lab results back, or your next, maybe even 5 minutes depend on the doctor opening up those laboratory results, or you getting a phone call from the insurance company. And that is extremely stressful.
Don't ask of yourself anything more than you're able to give, and you have to prioritize. And I think you're talking about if you're the caregiver and you're taking care of your spouse, in your case, that you do what you need to do for the needs of the day, whatever that is, to feed yourselves, to get yourself to and from the appointments. That's why, one of the tips for friends and family can be, helping out with things. You and I were talking earlier. I have a girlfriend that when her friend was in the end stages of her disease, she said, I will drive your girls to the orthodontist. I thought that was fantastic, that was one thing that this woman didn't have to manage. Moving on to more of your work, because I think that you're a great, I don't want to say storyteller, documentarian. You have an ability to connect with people by not only sharing your stories, but by reporting about the successful journeys and the struggles of others. And you are a columnist for the Huffington Post, right? In that regard.
Well, I'm not currently. So what I'm currently doing, that was in the past, I'm currently writing for Katie Couric Media, Maria Shriver's website, Sunday Paper. She'll love that I said that. I'm going to tell Maria. She follow the Sunday Paper as well as Wake Up Call with Katie Couric. You may see yours truly in there. So that's where I've been lending my words lately.
Well, one of your stories was about gaslighting and how
that's for Psychology Today. So I do have a column with them as well.
So gaslighting.
So that one actually was born out of a very painful experience. I experienced gaslighting, even though I'm a mental health professional. I had absolutely no idea that was happening to me. And somebody actually had to pull me aside and say, they're gaslighting me. And I had the look on my face like, what? I couldn't see it. My blind spot was so large at this point because of the trauma and me not understanding that that's what was happening. And it's
Mhm.
something that happens to thousands of people, I found, when not only in my research, but the piece was extremely popular with Psychology Today. And people have been sharing their stories of gaslighting, medical gaslighting, gaslighting within families, gaslighting at work.
So let's define it. What is that? What does it mean?
So the way that I'm defining it is someone, or sometimes it's a group of people, are telling you something that's different, and they've literally, I would say, altered the reality of what you've experienced to use it against you in a negative way. So it's not positive. So either they do that through mechanisms such as undermining you, minimizing what you're experiencing, actually telling you that that's not what happened, and or convincing you that the pain is not as great as what you're currently experiencing.
Right. So it's negating, invalidating, diminishing. And I think you had a story how that related to a new widow, somebody who was abroad, married to, they were living in Paris, and she went to take care of maybe some of the business of his death. You gave me her name, Toffler.
Oh, sure. So Susan Toffler is a widow who shares her first and last name in my book and everything. And her husband died very suddenly. He was working in Paris at the time, and she and her two young children, who were under age 10 at the time, were actually at the airport, getting ready to meet him in Paris, when she received a phone call, and this is before text messaging, that he had died. And she was, again, a very young widow and didn't know, what to do next. And somebody actually said, you need to file Social Security benefits. Like, you need to go to the office. So she physically went to the office in a fog of disbelief and sat down, and she said something to the effect of, I just don't know what I'm going to do. And with her, head in her hands, she was just completely shocked and disoriented. And the woman in the Social Security office said, honey, you're just having a really bad day, which is unbelievable. And it's also something, years later, that she remembered and telling me. So these are the types of things that,
hurtful, painful, that can knock you to your knees, and you're already down there. So I want to ask you about a future focus for your work, but what can we do as friends and family of people that have lost their spouse, specifically women, that you think would be the most helpful, what you found to be the most helpful?
I found to be the most helpful as somebody, again, this is before text messaging, when I lost my husband, was I had one friend, for example, who stocked my pantry. I mean, I walked in there, I was like, what is all this? And I'm talking the food pantry, as well as the closet where all the paper towels, all the paper products, toilet paper, things that I use every day, but didn't even realize I was running out of. She also did my laundry for me. And these are things I never asked for, but were extremely helpful. Somebody else, for example, texted me, years later, after my husband died, around the time of his death, and said to me, this must be a really tough time for you. And she was right. And that was it, and there was heart emojis. But that means the world to someone who has lost someone, because you often think that they've forgotten about you.
I was going to say that you're not forgotten. Absolutely. Let me ask you, Kristin, we're at the end of our time almost, what you see as a future focus for yourself and your work. You're a busy lady.
I am. So what I do now is I'm not working as a therapist. I have been, for the past handful of years, I help other people share their story. So that might be in a book form, it might be in a blog form, it might be in a platform as online teaching. And so whether it's helping them obtain an agent, writing a book proposal, getting a blog to readers, that's what I do, is I help people share their story. And I also help people with creating connections and open possibilities for their work.
I agree with all of those things. And you tell a story, and you're listening, and you're connecting. And we so appreciate your work. Thank you so much for being with us today.
Thank you, Linda.